Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Lauseneziris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. We're continuing the series where I'm presenting games selected by my Facebook friends. But before we go to the game, an important announcement. And let me share my screen with you. A subscriber, Zanilo from Italy, has just started the tournament that he has organized, the Underwater Moonlight the Nine Moons Tournament. Finally, he decided instead of waiting for 243 players to register, this is 3 to the power of 5, he felt that 3 to the power of 481 players are enough, and once we had these 81 players registered, the tournament started today, November 11th, on the anniversary of the end of the First World War. 81 players divided into 9 groups of 9. The first 3 advanced to the next round of 27, and 3 groups of 9, and the best 3 from every group advanced to the final with 9 players. Until now, you can see all the pairings. First of all, the starting position is not the one that we know in chess, but the one after the opening. So this is what's called a thematic tournament, meaning the first moves have been played for the players, and they start from this position, whether with white or with black. Let's give a look at the 9 groups and see how things have been going. You're going to see that most games are still underway, but there are 2 groups where one player in each group has decided that they are not interested any longer and they have resigned from all the games. Group 5, it is the one at the bottom, and they have withdrawn. You see, this arrow here means that they withdrew from the tournament. White the below is from Congo, and on group 6 it is no, sorry, wrong. This is group 7. From group 6 it is Lord Nelson 93 from England. That is why the other players have 2 points in these 2 groups. In all the other groups, the players have 0. It's 2 days per move, no vacations allowed. And let's see how things will go. We are going to inform you when games start completing and what's happening in the various games. In my own tournament, grecochess, nothing has changed. Still, we need 10 more games for the first round to complete. But let's go now to the game that we are going to show to you. My Facebook friend who suggested this game is Gráψa. Her nickname is Zeta, so I'm going to call her Zeta from now on. She's from Greece, my compatriot from Greece, and her opponent is Allahverdiyeya from Azerbaijan. Zeta is a women FIDE master with a rating of 2086, while Ayan is a women international master with a rating of 220. This means that Ayan has a higher rating by 134 points. She's up to point a favorite. But usually in this series, favorites rarely win. But let's see what's going to happen. Zeta has the white pieces, Aya has the black. The game took place quite recently, 1 or 2 months ago in Batumi, Georgia. It was part of the European Team Championship, and the 2 players represented their national team. Zeta was playing for Greece and Ayan for Azerbaijan. And let's start with the game. As always, I'm going to enter the moves one by one from the score sheet on the chessboard of chess.com, and the computer, which is TalkV16, will tell us who has the advantage. Positive number means white is better. Black means that, negative number means black is better. Computer will show whether the move played was the best, and if not, which move would have been the best, and what are the top 5 moves for the other player whose turn is to come. And we start with Zeta and the white pieces. Pawn goes to d4. This is, I would say, the second most popular move for white after the pawn going to e4. In the previous video, we saw the English opening, the third most popular, pawn goes to c4. And in other videos, we've seen the white player starting with the knight on g1 going to f3. Why to do so? So that the opponent doesn't know yet with which pawn you're going to start. And when the pawn goes to d4, there are two popular answers. The most popular, pawn to d5 symmetric, or the knight to f6. And Ayan places her knight to f6. And when you start with the d pawn, then you usually continue with the c pawn. In fact, here you cannot play the e pawn to e4 because the knight on f6 will grab it. Although some players have played the e pawn go to e3, but Zeta places her pawn to c4, and Ayan places her pawn to e6, and by doing so liberates her bishop on f8 that is not blocked by the e7 pawn any longer. But this has a potential problem that when the d7 pawn moves, then the bishop on c8 will be blocked by the pawn on e6. Let's continue. Zeta wants to fianchetto, so that's why she prepares it by pushing her pawn to g3, and Ayan places her pawn to d5 in the center and threatens the pawn on c4, but if she takes it, then Zeta will move her pawn to e3 and take it back with the pawn on c4, and Zeta has better control of the center. In any case, Zeta places her knight on f3, and Ayan checks the bishop from b4. Zeta replies the bishop on d2, and Ayan places her bishop back to d6. And some of you may be wondering, the same way I was wondering when I first saw this kind of combinations, why would Ayan waste a move and need two moves to place her bishop on d6 while helping Zeta develop her bishop to d2? And the answer that I read, I could never have found myself, and I'm still not completely understanding it, is that there are possibilities where the knight from b1 would like to go to d2, and by placing the bishop on d2, black deprives white of this possibility. This is the answer that I've read. But we completed the first 5 moves. Zeta has an advantage of 0.45. Usually because white starts first, although it's a little bit more than the average white starts first, but still it's not that important yet. But let's continue. Zeta develops the other knight to c3 while Ayan short castles. And Zeta will place her bishop on c5 and pin the knight on f6. This is the last of the book moves. Until now, players have been following book moves, meaning they have followed opening theory, and these positions have been extensively analyzed in opening theory in the past. And more often than not, the players know them by heart. But at some point, you get out of opening and you have to think on your own. Ayan is going to place her pawn on c6. Excellent moves as a computer would rather have the pawn to e7 to break the pin. Clearly doesn't allow the white knight to go to b5, strengthens the d5 pawn, but on the other side blocks the knight on b8, cannot go to c6. Zeta finally completes the fianchetto, bishop to g2, and Ayan pushes the pawn to h6 and asks Zeta the question, what are you going to do with this bishop? You cannot keep the pin any longer. If you try to put your bishop to h4, pawn goes to g5, and your bishop is lost. That is one problem when you move your g pawn to g3 for white or g6 for black. What else can you do? Send it back all the way, basically undevelop it, or you may want to exchange your bishop with a knight. And that's what Zeta decides to do. Let's exchange on f6. And now Zeta will push her pawn to c5. Computer says it's inaccuracy, would rather have white castle king size. It's on king side. What's happening? On the short term, Ayan sees that her bishop on d6 is attacked, and she must move it, and she cannot take the pawn on c5, protected by the pawn on d4. But on the long term, when there are tensions, meaning two sides, each one can take the other one, it's better to keep the tension. The difference is not that big, but marginally, it's better to keep the tension and wait for the other person to break. In any case, again, must move her bishop. Computer would rather have it on e7, but she places it on c7, second best move, still good. And we completed the first 10 moves, and the score, as you see, is even. Let's continue, see what's happening. Short castling or king side castling for Zeta, and pawn to b6 for Ayan, that is trying to challenge the pawn on c5. But Zeta is not going to allow it. We'll push her pawn to b4. And now exchanges for Ayan. Exchange at c5, Ayan starts first, and Zeta. Until now, the game is more or less even with small advantage for black. But now Ayan will play a move that the computer thinks it's a mistake. Pawn to e5. And really now the advantage of Zeta is important, 1.50. Why is it so? To begin with, Zeta gets the pawn on e5. And you may think, can't black take it back and Ayan use the bishop? Of course, not the queen, because the knight is on f3. If you try this thing, bishop to e5 is just the third best move for black. If you play it, you will end up in a position like the one you see on the board below, where white somehow is still able to get an extra pawn. And in fact, this is the passed pawn on c5. You may wonder, how can players from move number 14 see what will happen on move number 28? And my answer is, I wish I knew. Myself, I'm not able to look so much. And I doubt that too many players can really see all the way until move 28. But if you're a good player, you start developing what are called the instincts. This means that although you don't know exactly the position later, you have an idea if it will favor you or your opponent. And Aya can see this thing. That's why she places a queen on e6 and avoid taking the pawn. But still, Zeta has an extra pawn and an advantage of 1.62. Pawn to e4 for Zeta. She's hoping to exchange on d5. Or maybe the pawn on d5 goes to e4 and exchange on e4. She's ahead by a pawn. Why not empty the board and go to an ending with an extra pawn? Ayan doesn't like this option, but she plays what the computer thinks a mistake. Pawn to d, it's not a mistake, but it's not the ideal. Pawn goes to d4. Ideally, the computer would like Ayan to exchange on e4. And we completed the first 15 moves, and white has an advantage of 2.01. Little by little, it starts becoming important. Continue later. Zeta takes the pawn on d4. Inaccuracies as a computer would rather have the knight go to d5 to be sacrificed. You may be wondering why. What does the computer say? We'll reach this position. First, you see, if it goes to d5, black will not take it directly, but will make up a pin. And we'll reach this position here if knight goes to d5. White has a pawn less, black is an extra pawn, a piece less, I'm sorry. Has a bishop less, black is an extra bishop, but pawns, white has three extra pawns, and they are the pawns on c5, d5, e5. We have connected past pawn c5, d5. Also next to them is the pawn at e5 that is not yet passed. That is what might arise. but not now. Queen goes to d4, as we said. And knight to d7 for Ayan. Inaccuracy, says the computer. And now Zeta will play a brilliant move. Knight goes to d5. That's what the computer suggested in the previous move. Zeta does it now. You see, it's a brilliant. Why? Because not only it is a very good move, it attacks the bishop on c7 and forces the bishop perhaps to retreat, but also because it offers the opponent the chance to use the c6 pawn to take the knight on d5. And you may be wondering why Black should not do it. Why Ayan should resist the temptation and not grab the knight on d5. You'd have to go here to see that after all these moves, White would end up with, let's see what is the case here. White has two rooks, bishop knight, and Black has two rooks and two bishops, but White has 6 pawns and Black has 4. So White would be 2 extra pawns if two players followed all the best moves. Again, you may be wondering how can players from move 17, what will happen in move 27? What can I say? I wish I had that skill, but most likely they used instincts that if pawn takes knight, eventually white is going to be better. Well, you can see immediately that you have the three of pawns on c5, d5, e5. White doesn't have these double pawns any longer. 2 out of these 3 you can see immediately become connected pass pawns, c5, d5. But still a piece is a piece. In any case, Ayan realizes things will not be so nice if she takes a knight, so she pushes her bishop back to b8. Knight to f4 for Zeta, which says to Ayan, you had one chance to get my knight, no chances any longer. If anything now, beware of your queen that's attacked by my knight. And queen, of course, goes to e8. And Zeta pushes a pawn to e6. Now this pawn is attacked 3 times by bishop e8, knight d7, queen e8, and is protected only twice by queen d4 and knight f3. That's why the pawn, if Zeta does nothing, it will be lost, and Zeta prefers to have it lost on e6. Here it is going to be attacked twice by pawn f7, queen e8, and it's going to be attacked by knight, going to be defended by knight on f4. And Ayan takes back the pawn, and now material is even. But now there is the danger of the fork, meaning if Zeta does nothing, if Ayan could have a second move in a row, pawn goes to e5, it attacks queen d4, knight f4, and it's protected 3 times, bishop b8, knight d7, queen e8, and defended only twice by knight f3 and queen d4. That is why if White decides to use the knight on f3 to take the pawn, White will end up with a piece, losing a piece, perhaps for gaining a pawn. That is why, to stop this possibility, Zeta pushes her pawn on e5. The best move, clearly. Some moves are easy to see why the best. Other ones, it's difficult, and other ones, at least for players at my level of 1600, it is impossible. Rook to f7 for Ayan. And we completed at this point the first 20 moves. And let's see how things are going. The advantage of Zeta is significant, is great, 3.23. You need major blunders for White, or, well, 1 or 2 blunders would be enough, but a lot of mistakes for the result to change. So long as there are queens in the board, one needs to be very, very careful. If accidentally you blunder your queen, you may end up from being ahead 3.23 to losing. But let's see what's going to happen. Zeta places her rook on e1 to have better control of the e-file, and now Ayan decides to start expanding on the queen side, pawn to a5. Zeta places her knight on d2, while Ayan places her queen on e7. And now Zeta sees the wonderful pawn on c6 unprotected, and her bishop grabs it. She's ahead by 2 pawns, but Ayan will threaten the bishop with the rook. And by the way, you can see that the pawn on e5 is in a perilous situation, as I say, meaning it is attacked. Not on e5, on c5, I'm sorry. It's attacked twice by the knight on d7, the queen on e7, defended only by the queen on d4. That is why for Zeta, to save the pawn, she must use what's called a greater threat. She sends the bishop to b5 and threatens the white rook on a6. And now, Ayan is going to win the pawn on c5 and disregards the rook on a6. And Zeta is not going to take it. No matter how tempting it is, yes, he's going to lose the bishop because knight will take a bishop, but still win an exchange. Why not? Because she will place her rook on c1, and instead of going the exchange, she goes for the entire piece. The knight on c5 is attacked twice by rook c1 and queen d4. If white could play, they would immediately grab the knight. And how will Ayan reply? She will defend it. Bishop goes to a7. And so for the time being, the knight on c5 is safe, but the rook on a6 is still under attack. And we completed the first 25 moves. White's advantage is very significant, 4.36. How will Zeta continue? Because it's not enough to have the advantage. You need to know how to convert. I've both won and lost games where one side was quite a lot ahead and then a small inaccuracy or lack of attention made the result to change. Knight goes to e4 for Zeta. Queen to b7 for Ayan, threatening the white bishop on b5. So now Zeta grabs the knight on c5 with the rook, then bishop takes it back, then queen takes the bishop. So we see until now that white has won 2 pieces for the rook, which is usually something you want to have, because 2 pieces are 6 pawns and the rook is 5 pawns. And Ayan is going to save her rook. It's threatened on a6, send it back to a7. But now Zeta has a wonderful fork. Knight goes to d6 and threatens simultaneously queen at b7, rook at f7, and also, in case the queen, also, but less important, the bishop on c8. And how will Ayan reply? Queen to c7. So white, if white exchanges queen, then black will take with the f7 rook, and this means that the fork is not there any longer. Move number 30 for Zeta is queen goes to e3. And let's see what is the situation. Zeta has 2 extra pawns. threatens the rook on f7. And where can the rook go? Let's assume it goes to, cannot go to d7, cannot go to f6, f5. There's not too many squares to go, f8 or e7. Well, if it goes to f8, knight takes bishop, and if it is recovered by the rook, the pawn is lost. If it's recovered by the queen, then the rook on e7 is lost. What if rook goes to e7? Then can white gain an extra pawn? Because if knight takes bishop, then queen takes, the rook is not lost. But then yes, but it's not a clear win. What would happen if rook went on e7? If anything, the computer wants black to send the rook to b7 and attack the bishop. This is a continuation of the computer, but in this case, Ayana Allahverdiyeya resigned, and so Zeta won the game. Zeta Γράψα, Georgia Γράψα, her full name, for Greece, and gave Greece a point in this match against Azerbaijan. Let's see what the computer would think. The computer thinks that if both players play their best, it would reach this position. Well, believe it or not, white has a queen, an extra queen, queen and two knights, and black has rook and bishop. Clearly, this position is completely lost for black. This is move 37, 7 moves later. At this point, I'm not sure if Ayan should resign or not. She has 2 pawns less, but there is some fighting. This is my personal opinion. But let's see now. First of all, let's congratulate Zeta for her win, and the fact that this win was a point for my own national team of Greece, my home country. This really makes me feel very proud. I'm very proud of you, Zeta, and thank you for everything you've done for our country, representing our country in the chess tournaments. But let's see the review. What does the chessboard have to say? Here we are. 99% accuracy for Zeta. That is tremendous. Great job, Zeta. You played as if your rating was 2,500. That is a spectacular performance. Well, on the other side, Ayan played not that bad, 88.4, and with a performance of 2,400. You see here that Zeta, the only time she deviated from the perfect was one inaccuracy when the queen took on d4, and two moves that were only excellent and not the best. Let's go to the categories one by one. One brilliant move for Zeta when the knight went to d5. Best move, 19 Zeta, 7 Ayan. Excellent. 2 Zeta, 11 Ayan. Good 4 for Ayan. Book moves. The first 7 for Zeta and 6 for Ayan. Inaccuracies 1 for Zeta when the queen went to d4, and 1 blunder for Ayan. This concludes the coverage of this game. Once again, congratulations, Zeta. Of course, thanks to both of the players of putting up the show, this performance. And Zeta, being my compatriot, my Greek compatriot, I'm very proud of you. And I'm very proud of all the Greek chess players. And very happy that some of them decided to be my Facebook friends. As I mentioned before, we have a few more friends, Facebook friends to cover. Then we have to cover the Connecticut State Chess Championship, my games there. What did I do? And the two tournaments, the Moonlight and the grecochess, they go on as games complete. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Thanks to the subscribers. If you have not subscribed, all you need to do is click the subscribe button. Thanks to the likes. We have quite a lot of likes all this time. And we had some nice comments. Baran Demir, whom I covered last time, sent me a thank you comment. Baran, you're very, very welcome, and thank you for sharing this game with us. We'll see you in the next video with another of my Facebook friends. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Harry Lasanesiris. This is my Gotham YouTube channel. Goodbye.